She was 19 and trying to pretend the cold didn't hurt anymore. Not just the weather, everything. The kind of cold that settled inside a person after hearing the words, "You are no longer family." For 6 nights, Clara Whitmore had been sleeping wherever. She could: church benches, bus terminals. Once inside a flower delivery van parked behind a grocery store while freezing rain tapped softly against the roof all night long. She carried one worn suitcase and an old canvas satchel filled with things nobody else wanted: a silver pocket watch that no longer worked, 3 letters tied with faded ribbon, and a tiny brass key her grandfather once told her never to lose. She still didn't know why, after her father threw her out following a bitter fight over inheritance debts and family shame. Clara wandered north until she reached a nearly abandoned town wrapped in fog and pine trees. That was where she found the listing: an old cemetery gatehouse beside St. Mercy Cemetery. $3. Nobody else bid. On it, the roof sagged badly. The iron gates outside were rusted nearly shut, and locals whispered strange things about the cellar beneath the building. Most people avoided the place after sunset, but what she didn't know was someone had hidden something beneath that gatehouse long before she arrived. Something buried beneath layers of silence. Something tied to grief, to forgotten names, and to a secret someone protected for over 40 years. Clara would uncover it slowly, one strange detail at a time, and by the time she finally understood what waited beneath the cellar, she would no longer be the same girl who arrived there alone in the rain. Before we continue, if stories like this stay with you long after they end, if you believe forgotten places sometimes carry forgotten lives inside them, take a moment to subscribe, and if you've ever lost a home, a person, or even a piece of yourself, leave a comment below. Sometimes strangers understand pain better than family ever could. Clara grew up surrounded by antiques, not expensive antiques, personal ones: old clocks, dusty books, broken candle holders, wooden furniture carrying scratches from decades of use. Her grandfather, Edwin Whitmore, restored forgotten objects for a living, not because it paid well, because he believed abandoned things deserved another chance. His repair shop sat behind the family house beneath enormous cedar trees. The place smelled constantly of varnish, old paper machine oil, and rain drifting through cracked windows. Clara spent most afternoons there as a child, watching, listening, learning quietly. Edwin spoke slowly while working, never rushed. Never loud. Sometimes entire hours passed while he repaired old watches beneath warm yellow light without saying more than a few words. But Clara loved those silences because they felt safe. "People throw away things too quickly," Edwin once told her while polishing a damaged music box. "Objects carry memory." Clara looked confused. "How?" He smiled faintly. "Because somebody once loved them." Years later, standing alone inside the cemetery gatehouse, those exact words would return to her, and suddenly mean everything. Edwin taught her small forgotten skills over time. How to repair hinges, how to identify old wood by smell, how to tell when hollow walls concealed hidden spaces. "Old buildings whisper," he often said while tapping floors with his cane. "You just have to listen long enough." Clara thought he sounded magical back then, maybe slightly strange too. But after her grandmother died, Edwin changed. The workshop became quieter. He spent longer hours restoring objects nobody wanted anymore, especially watches, dozens of them, ticking softly together in the dim room. Sometimes Clara found him sitting silently at night, listening to them, not working, just listening, as if the sound comforted him somehow. When Clara was 15, Edwin handed her a tiny brass key attached to faded black thread. "Keep this safe." "What does it open?" "You'll know eventually." That answer frustrated her for years, but she kept the key anyway, mostly because it came from him. Edwin died the following winter during a heavy snowstorm. Heart failure. Quick, unexpected. Afterward, the family fractured almost immediately. Money problems surfaced, debt collectors came. Often arguments echoed through the house constantly. Her father became bitter, especially after learning Edwin had left most valuables unpaid for rather than sold. He cared more about dead junk than this family. He snapped once. Clara never forgave him for saying that. Her grandmother Eleanor had been different entirely, gentle, soft-spoken, always smelling faintly of lavender soap and candle wax. She volunteered at St. Mercy Cemetery years earlier before illness forced her home as a child. Clara sometimes accompanied her there during autumn afternoons. Eleanor cleaned old gravestones carefully by hand, slowly, respectfully, like introducing herself to strangers. "You should never rush around the dead," she once whispered. "Why? Because memory deserves patience." The cemetery frightened Clara at first. Fog drifted constantly between old stone paths, crows gathered near iron fences, wind moved through trees with long whispering sounds. But Eleanor never seemed afraid. She knew names carved into nearly every stone: forgotten soldiers, children lost during winters, families erased by sickness. Generations earlier, they disappeared twice. Eleanor once said quietly while brushing moss from a grave marker. The first time when they die, the A. Second when nobody remembers them anymore. Those words stayed with Clara long after Eleanor passed away too. Years later, standing inside the Gatehouse cellar, she would finally understand exactly what her grandmother meant by 18. Clara barely recognized her own home anymore. Bills stacked everywhere. Her father drank heavily. Rooms once filled with music and conversation became silent, tense, uncomfortable. Then came the final argument. Her father discovered Edwin secretly borrowed money years earlier to preserve historical records from St. Mercy Cemetery rather than selling them to developers. "You ruined this family for dead strangers," he shouted. Clara defended him immediately. He was protecting history. He was protecting garbage. That word broke something inside her. Garbage, as if memory itself had no value anymore. 2 nights later, after another violent argument, her father pointed toward the door. "If you care so much about old ghosts," he said coldly, "go live with them." And so she left, with one suitcase, one satchel, and the tiny brass key hanging around her neck. St. Mercy Cemetery sat several miles outside town, surrounded by pine forest and thick rolling fog. Clara arrived near dusk, walking along an empty gravel road. Rain dripped steadily from tree branches overhead. The deeper she walked, the quieter everything became. No cars, no voices, only wind moving through wet leaves. Finally, she saw the cemetery gates rising through fog ahead, tall black iron rust spreading across every surface, and beside them, the gatehouse, small, cracked. Lonely one upstairs window hung slightly open despite the rain. The building leaned subtly sideways with age, like it had grown tired of standing. Clara stopped walking. Her stomach tightened, painfully. This place belonged to her now. This forgotten thing nobody wanted. Lightning flashed faintly behind distant clouds. For one strange moment, the gatehouse almost looked alive, watching her, waiting. Inside smelled like dust, damp stone, mildew, and old smoke trapped for decades. The wooden floors creaked beneath every step. Furniture remained untouched. An old desk near the staircase still held dried ink bottles. A cracked lantern sat beside stacks of yellowed cemetery records, as if someone simply vanished one afternoon and never returned. Then Clara noticed something strange. Near the fireplace, tiny scratch marks covered part of the floor. Repeated marks. Circular, like heavy furniture had been moved there many times before. She crouched slowly beside them. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just hidden. The first nights inside the gatehouse were terrible. Pipes groaned constantly. Wind rattled loose shutters after midnight. And every evening around the same time, Clara heard faint knocking somewhere beneath the floor. 3 knocks, then silence. At first she blamed old pipes or tree roots, but the sounds continued every night. Always near the fireplace, always around midnight. During the day she cleaned slowly, one room at a time. She found cemetery maps, old funeral ledgers, photographs of caretakers long dead, and stranger things. A drawer filled with silver nameplates removed from graves, dozens of pocket watches, all stopped at exactly 11:17 and hidden inside a cabinet, letters addressed to families who never came. Back to claim bodies after a mine collapse decades earlier, the deeper Clara searched, the stranger the Gatehouse became. A week later she met Martin Vale, the elderly groundskeeper living in a trailer near the far edge of the cemetery. Tall, thin, always wearing dark wool coats smelling faintly of soil and tobacco. He noticed Clara carrying buckets from the old water pump. "You staying in the Gatehouse?" Clara nodded carefully. Martin looked uncomfortable instantly. "Haven't seen anyone. Lived there in years." "Why?" The old man hesitated, then quietly answered. "Caretaker disappeared." Clara froze. "Disappeared?" Martin stared toward the fog-covered graves. 42 years ago. What happened? No one knows. That answer followed her all night long, especially because Martin seemed afraid to say more. Later that evening, Clara discovered something hidden behind loose wallpaper near the staircase. Names, dozens of names scratched directly into wood beneath the paper, each followed by dates, some ending abruptly, some unfinished entirely at the bottom. Someone carved one final sentence. "They deserve to be remembered." Clara stared at the words silently, while cold moved slowly through her chest. That night, rain hammered the roof violently. Candles flickered beside the fireplace, and once again, 3 hollow knocks echoed beneath the floorboards. Closer this time. Clara grabbed the lantern immediately. The sound came directly beneath the fireplace stones. She knelt carefully, pressed her ear down. Nothing, only silence. Then faintly metal scraping somewhere deep below. The next morning, Clara examined the fireplace more closely. The stones looked uneven. Not random uneven. Intentional, as if part of the structure had been sealed later. When she brushed ash away carefully, she discovered a tiny keyhole hidden between 2 stones. Her heartbeat stopped instantly. Slowly, her hand moved toward the brass key hanging around her neck. The key Edwin gave her years earlier. The brass key fit perfectly. For several seconds, Clara simply stared in disbelief. Then she turned it slowly. Deep inside the wall, something clicked. A hidden stone panel shifted slightly beside the fireplace. Cold air escaped through the opening, carrying the smell of earth-old paper and candle smoke. Darkness waited beyond. Clara lifted the lantern carefully and stepped inside. A narrow staircase descended beneath the gatehouse. Cellar stone walls surrounded her tightly. Water dripped softly somewhere below. The deeper she climbed, colder the air became. Finally, she reached a hidden underground room. Small dust covered, untouched for decades. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, journals, and cemetery records tied carefully with string. In the center stood a wooden table covered in photographs, children, families, workers, name as matching the scratched list upstairs. Clara moved slowly through the room, overwhelmed by silence. Then she noticed the lockboxes, 4 heavy metal lockboxes stacked carefully beneath the table. Inside the first, bundles of cash wrapped in oilcloth. Inside the second, gold coins, jewelry, and old land deeds. Enough wealth to change someone's life completely. But the third box stopped her heart. It held hundreds of personal belongings labeled carefully by name. Wedding rings, letters, pocket watches, baby shoes, objects recovered from unclaimed graves after disasters and accidents. Someone preserved them all, protected them, remembered them. Tears filled Clara's eyes immediately. Then she found the journal property of Samuel Mercer, the missing caretaker. His writings described corrupt officials secretly planning to destroy old cemetery records and sell the land decades earlier. Samuel hid the valuables and records underground to protect the identities of forgotten dead whose families never received proper burial compensation. One passage made Clara's hands tremble. If memory dies, people disappear completely. She swallowed hard, because those words sounded exactly like Eleanor. Then she found one final envelope addressed simply to the girl with the brass key. Her breath caught instantly. Inside rested a short handwritten letter from Edwin. "If you found this, then Samuel kept his promise. Some things are worth more than money, Clara. Names matter. Memory matters. Forgotten people matter." Clara began crying silently beneath the cellar light. Not because of the gold, Not because of the money, because suddenly she understood everything. Her grandfather wasn't preserving objects, he was preserving lives. The discovery changed Clara. Slowly, not overnight. The money repaired the gatehouse roof, then the cemetery paths, then the broken records archive. She worked constantly for months, cataloging names, restoring damaged photographs, repairing gravestones herself, using techniques Edwin once taught her. Martin helped quietly, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes helping carry stone. Never asking for anything in return, people slowly returned to St. Mercy Cemetery afterward. Families searching for lost relatives, historians, visitors. The forgotten place slowly breathed again, and somehow, so did Clara, one snowy evening. Clara repaired Edwin's old pocket watch beside the fireplace, the same fireplace hiding the secret room beneath. Warm light filled the gatehouse softly. Outside, snow covered the cemetery in silence. Inside, the old watch finally ticked again, steady, gentle, alive. For the first time in years, Clara no longer felt abandoned. Eventually, Clara realized the hidden cellar was never truly about treasure. It was about remembrance, about protecting people from disappearing completely. Because maybe the saddest thing in the world isn't death. Maybe it's being forgotten, and maybe healing begins the moment someone chooses to remember 1 year later. Clara stood outside the restored gatehouse, watching fog drift slowly between gravestones at sunrise. The iron cemetery gates had been repaired carefully, flowers lined the pathways again. Warm lantern light glowed softly through the gatehouse windows. She thought about the girl wandering through, rain carrying one suitcase and nowhere to go. That girl believed her life had ended, but sometimes broken places hide strange things beneath them. Sometimes forgotten buildings carry enough love to save someone else. Clara looked toward the fireplace, inside the gatehouse, then touched the brass key hanging around her neck and smiled softly. Because she finally understood something her grandfather tried teaching her all along. People disappear only when nobody remembers their names anymore. And somehow, Gatehouse had remembered hers before she ever arrived. If this story moved you, subscribe for more emotional mystery stories like this, and in the comments tell us about someone or somewhere you never forgot, because memory keeps people alive longer than we realize.